It was 7:42 p.m. on a Tuesday when the phone rang, slicing through the silence of my kitchen. I had just set down a cup of chamomile tea, steam curling into the air, when I saw her name flashing across the screen. My neighbor. My friend. A woman who had been in my living room 100 times, laughing over pies and church gossip. Her voice came fast, frantic, the kind that makes your stomach drop before the words even register. "Mary, it's your husband," he collapsed. "They think it's a stroke." This is not just a story, it's a chilling journey through betrayal, heartbreak, and revenge. Don't miss a single twist. Watch until the very end. My heart clenched, but my hands didn't shake. Not yet. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, staring at the second hand of the kitchen clock as it ticked louder than I'd ever noticed before. "What hospital?" I asked, my voice calm, steady, too steady for the storm rising in my chest. She stammered. "Just for a second. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But I did. A slip. And in that crack I felt something cold seep through. I grabbed my coat, keys rattling in my hand, and drove through the night like the car was carrying my heartbeat itself. The air outside was sharp, the streets wet from an earlier rain, neon reflections stretching across the asphalt. My mind raced, but not only with fear. A quiet part of me, the part one never let anyone see, started piecing together the oddness. She hadn't said which hospital right away. She had paused. That was strange. For a woman who lived on details, whose garden was lined in perfect rows, whose gossip carried every date and name, that hesitation was a thread I couldn't ignore. But still I drove. Because if there was even a chance her words were true, nothing else mattered. When I burst through the hospital doors, the smell of antiseptic wrapped around me. Nurses hurried past, shoes squeaking against tile. My chest pounded as I called out his name at the front desk. The clerk looked puzzled. She typed, checked, and finally said, "Ma'am, your husband was admitted earlier, but he's awake. Stable." Stable. The word hit me like a wave, knocking me off balance. Relief and confusion tangled together. I followed the nurse down a long hall, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, until I saw him, sitting upright in bed, pale but breathing, his eyes flicking toward me with surprise. "Mary? What are you doing here?" "I just fainted, that's all." Fainted. Not a stroke. Not clinging to life. Just fainted. My knees nearly gave, but I forced a smile, forced myself to nod. "They said stroke," I whispered. He shook his head. "No. Nothing like that." And that's when I felt it, the unease settling into my bones like a winter draft. Someone had lied. Deliberately. On the drive back home, the unease only grew. The rain had stopped, but the world outside my windshield looked different. Sharper, harsher, shadows stretching longer than they should. I replayed her words in my mind, every syllable. The urgency. The pause. The almost too perfect concern in her tone. She had sounded desperate for me to believe her. Desperate for me to leave my house. Why? My house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. I left the engine running, headlights cutting across the windows. For a long moment I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Something felt off. A curtain was drawn in the wrong direction. My front door mat was shifted half an inch to the left. I knew because I'd straightened it just that morning. I walked in slowly, keys ready in my hand like a weapon. The smell of lavender cleaner still lingered, but underneath it was something else. The faint metallic tang of disturbed air, as if a door had opened and closed too many times. Nothing was missing at first glance. But I knew better. The next morning I called her. My voice was soft, casual, as though nothing was wrong. "Thank you for last night. I don't know what I would have done without your call." She laughed nervously. "Of course, dear. You know I'd do anything for you." But her laugh was too high, too tight. And in that laugh I heard confirmation. I didn't confront her then. I let her think I was blind, let her play her part. But sometimes the smartest move is to wait. And waiting, that was something I'd learned to do well. Later that week, little things began to surface. A bank notification I didn't recognize. A withdrawal my husband swore he hadn't made. An envelope left on my porch, torn open and empty. Each clue was small on its own, but together they formed a shape. A shape of betrayal. And every time I saw her across the fence, trimming her roses or waving sweetly, my stomach turned. I wondered if her hands shook when she did it. I wondered if she rehearsed her smiles in the mirror, practicing the mask she wore so well. The night I finally decided to confront her, The sky was heavy with clouds and the air smelled of rain. I crossed the yard slowly, each step deliberate, my heart beating steady, not wild. She was on her porch, rocking in her chair, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up, surprised to see me, but her smile came quick, too quick. "Mary, what a nice evening, isn't it?" I stood at the edge of her steps, the porch light casting shadows across her face. I didn't return her smile. "Why did you lie to me?" The words dropped between us like stones in water, breaking the calm, rippling outward. Her wine glass trembled just enough for me to see it. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then forced a laugh. "Lie? I don't know what you mean." But I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the tiny crack in her mask. And in that moment I knew I was right. I didn't press further. Not yet. I simply held her gaze, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. Then I turned, walked back across the yard and shut my door behind me. Because the lie had already shattered my night. And soon it would shatter much more. I shut my door behind me, her face still burning in my mind, that flicker of fear when I asked the question she wasn't ready for. She thought the silence had ended the conversation. What she didn't know was that it had only begun. I leaned against the door for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. My hands didn't tremble, though my body felt heavy. I'd lived long enough to know that confrontation was just the spark. The real fire comes from patience. So I decided then, I wouldn't charge at her with accusations. I'd let her believe she was safe. I'd smile, nod, wave from across the yard. Meanwhile, I'd weave the kind of web she wouldn't notice until it was wrapped tight around her. The next morning I kept my routine. Coffee in the kitchen. A slow walk to the mailbox. But I noticed everything. Her blinds shifted when I stepped outside. A sliver of light, then closed again. He was watching me. I smiled anyway, bent down for my mail and hummed a hymn under my breath. Let her think I was unbothered. Inside I spread the envelopes across the table. Bills. Coupons. And tucked in between another notice from the bank. A small withdrawal, not large enough to alarm anyone, but I knew my husband hadn't touched it. The handwriting on the form looked familiar. Too familiar. I slipped the notice into a drawer. Proof didn't need to be shouted from rooftops. It needed to be collected quietly, piece by piece. I started paying attention to her routines. She left the house every Thursday at 10 a.m. sharp, always in the same beige coat, always carrying the same leather handbag. She'd return around noon, bags tucked under her arm, humming like she'd just bought the world. I followed once. Not close enough to spook her, just enough to see her stop by the bank before heading to the grocery store. She didn't see me parked 2 rows away, watching her slip inside, head down, movements too careful. I made notes. Dates. Times. Patterns. When you're my age, people think you don't notice things. They assume your eyes are dull, your memory weak. But I'd spent decades running a household, balancing accounts, remembering birthdays, watching faces. I'd seen more than most, and I remembered more than I let on. That was my hidden advantage. One afternoon, while watering my roses, I overheard a conversation. 2 women from church stood on the sidewalk, talking in hushed voices. They didn't notice me behind the hedge. "Strange, isn't it? She's been flashing money lately," one said. Home. And after her husband passed too. You'd think she'd be cutting back, not spending more." I held my breath. Their words were crumbs, but they led somewhere. She wasn't just stealing. She was flaunting it, at least in small ways, testing how far she could push before anyone questioned her. I smiled politely when I greeted them, pretending I hadn't heard. Inside though, I added another thread to my web. I began to test her myself. Small things. I'd leave my porch light on longer than usual, see if she mentioned it. He always did. Too observant. I'd forget to lock the side gate, and sure enough, it was closed tight the next morning, though I hadn't touched it. He was watching, meddling, adjusting. The more I tested, the more I confirmed. She wasn't just a thief. She was a woman who needed control. And that made her predictable. At the grocery store one morning, I bumped into her by the produce section. She smiled too wide, holding a bag of apples. "Mary, how's your husband? Feeling better?" Her voice was light, casual, but her eyes searched mine, waiting for signs of doubt or anger. I gave her none. I picked up a tomato, turned it in my hand and said, "He's fine, thank God. Stable as ever." For just a second her smile faltered. She had wanted me rattled, uncertain. Instead I was steady. That unsettled her more than any angry word could. At home I began keeping a notebook. Every withdrawal. Every odd look. Every overheard whisper. My handwriting was neat, careful, as if I were recording recipes. But these weren't recipes. They were the threads of the trap I was weaving. Still, doubt crept in sometimes. At night, lying in bed, I'd hear my husband's soft breathing and wonder. Was I imagining it? Was I letting suspicion turn into obsession? But then I'd remember the phone call, her voice trembling in all the wrong places. I'd remember the way she had looked at me on the porch when I asked why she lied. That flicker in her eyes. No, I wasn't imagining. I knew the truth even if I couldn't yet prove it. The more I observed, the more her arrogance showed. She waved at neighbors with her manicured nails, baked pies for church events, donated old clothes with a smile. Everyone thought she was generous, kind. But I saw the cracks. The wine bottles piling in her recycling bin. The way she snapped at her dog when she thought no one was watching. The tension in her shoulders when she checked her mailbox. She was slipping. And I was watching. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked near her driveway. A man stepped out, tall, sharp suit, eyes scanning the street. He knocked on her door. She let him in quickly, too quickly. I waited on my porch, pretending to water the flowers, heart steady but ears sharp. Their voices drifted through the open window. "I can't cover it much longer," the man said. "You'll get your share," she hissed back. My hand tightened on the watering can. "Sure. Cover." Words that smelled of secrets and schemes. I didn't hear more. The window shut, the blinds closed. But it was enough to know she wasn't working alone. That night I added a new rule to my plan. Never underestimate how deep her web might go. If she had partners, then my patience had to be stronger than all of theirs combined. I told no one, not even my husband. Protecting him meant keeping him in the dark. He'd never understand the quiet storm I was building, thread by thread. So I smiled across the fence. I waved at church. I nodded when she complimented my roses. And all the while I pulled the threads tighter. Because she thought she was the spider. But I was the one weaving the real web. By the end of that week I had a drawer full of evidence. Bank slips, notes, observations. It wasn't enough to expose her yet, but it was enough to know I wasn't wrong. And when I saw her on her porch again, rocking in that same chair, sipping her wine, she gave me that smile, the one polished smooth from years of practice. But this time I didn't just see the mask. I saw the cracks. And I knew sooner or later she'd step right into the center of the web I'd laid out for her. That certainty carried me into the next morning. The air was crisp, dew clinging to the grass, birds chirping with a kind of cheer I couldn't match. I stood at the kitchen window, coffee warming my hands, and watched her move about her yard. Same beige robe, same mug, same rehearsed smile when she waved at a passing car. But her rhythm was off. She lingered too long by the hedge, peeking into my yard as if expecting to catch me. Her robe sleeve slipped, and I saw her hand tremble just slightly before she tucked it back. The mask was cracking. That afternoon I made my first deliberate move. At the church potluck I sat across the room, close enough to watch but far enough not to be obvious. She held court at her table, laughing too loudly at jokes, touching arms, offering second helpings as though kindness could erase shadows. But I noticed what others didn't. The quick dart of her eyes toward me every few minutes, the way she bit her lip when she thought no one saw. Her mask of generosity was slipping under the weight of her own nerves. When dessert came, I leaned toward a woman beside me and said, "Funny how some folks get louder when they're nervous." I didn't glance her way, but I knew the words would land. Whispers always travel fastest in crowded rooms. And sure enough, when I looked back, her laugh was a beat too late, her smile a shade too stiff. At home later that night, I replayed the evening in my mind. I thought about how she'd gripped her fork tighter than needed, how her napkin had been shredded into tiny pieces under the table. It wasn't enough to expose her, not yet. But it was proof she wasn't untouchable. Even small pressure made her sweat. I wrote it all in my notebook. Date, event, behavior. No detail too small. Evidence builds like bricks, one on top of the other. A few days later, the first real slip happened. I was out back hanging laundry when she appeared on her porch, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was sharper than usual, frustration bleeding through. "No, I said not now," she snapped. "Boss. You promised it wouldn't be this soon." I froze, clothespin in hand, pretending to adjust a sheet. Her tone softened suddenly, fake sweet. Yes, of course. We'll manage it. Don't worry. He caught sight of me then. Her face changed in an instant, lips curling into that too smooth smile. She waved, voice sugary as honey, into the phone. All right, dear, talk soon. The sheet fluttered in my hand, but I stayed still, giving her only a small wave back. Inside, my pulse quickened. Who was she talking to? What was coming too soon? That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the tick of the clock, wondering who else was tangled in her scheme. The suited man I'd seen before came back to mind. His sharp eyes. The clipped tone. Was he the one on the phone? Or was there someone else, someone pulling strings I couldn't yet see? For the first time I felt the edges of fear. What if her web was bigger than I imagined? What if I was already inside it? I rolled onto my side, watching the shadows stretch across the ceiling. Fear whispered, but so did resolve. I reminded myself, patience is power. He was the one slipping, not me. 2 mornings later I got my chance to test her again. The mail carrier accidentally delivered one of her envelopes to my box. Plain white, but the sender's logo read from a debt collector. I held it in my hand, the paper thin but heavy with possibility. I could have opened it, but I didn't. That wasn't the kind of proof I wanted. Instead, I slipped it into an extra envelope and walked it to her door. She opened quickly, eyes wide when she saw what I held. Oh, that must have been misplaced. Thank you, Mary. Her voice was airy, too casual. But her hand darted out faster than necessary, snatching it from mine. He tucked it behind her back like a child hiding candy. I tilted my head, smiled just enough to unsettle. Funny how the post office mixes things up. Must happen more often than we think. Her smile wavered, then froze in place. Yes, more often than we think. I walked away, heart steady, notebook waiting for the new entry. Sunday came, and with it another opportunity. After service she approached me in the parking lot. The sun was bright, but her eyes looked shadowed. Mary, she said softly, I just wanted to say, I hope you're doing all right after everything. Her hand brushed my arm, gentle, almost rehearsed. I looked her straight in the eye. I'm doing better than you think. Her lips parted, but no words came. She only nodded too quickly and walked away. That was the first time I saw it. Real fear, raw and unmasked, flickering just for a second before she pulled the mask back on. But it wasn't just her behavior I noticed changing. Other neighbors had started whispering. At the corner store, I overheard 2 women muttering about odd comings and goings at her place. At the library, a man grumbled about a bad check connected to her name. The web I thought I was weaving was now tangled with threads of her own making. She was unraveling herself, one careless slip at a time. Late one evening, as I sat by the window with my notebook, I saw her porch light flick on. She stepped outside, pacing, phone pressed tight to her ear again. Her words carried through the cool night air. I can't keep covering this up, she whispered harshly. They're starting to notice. No, I told you she's not as blind as you think. My pen froze mid-sentence. He was talking about me. I leaned closer to the glass, careful not to be seen. Her pacing grew frantic, her free hand gesturing wildly. I can't lose everything over this. I won't. Then she stopped, stood still for a long moment and glanced toward my window. I ducked just in time, heart pounding in my ears. When I looked again, she was gone, the porch light off. I didn't sleep that night either. But it wasn't fear keeping me awake this time. It was confirmation. My suspicions weren't paranoia. She knew I saw her slipping, and that meant I had the upper hand. Still, new questions gnawed at me. Who was she speaking to? What was she covering? And just how far was she willing to go to protect herself? The following morning, I decided to push one step further. At the bakery downtown, I made casual conversation with the woman behind the counter. A friend of hers. She's been coming in often lately, the woman said, lowering her voice. Always paying in cash. Large bills. You don't see that much anymore. I smiled, thanked her, and left with my bread. Inside, though, I felt the pieces clicking together. Bank withdrawals. Debt collectors. Cash spending. She was bleeding money somewhere, and soon someone else would notice too. That evening, I walked past her house deliberately, letting my steps slow as I passed the window. The blinds were half open, and for the first time, I saw her sitting slumped in a chair, face in her hands, mask completely gone. Her shoulders shook once, twice before she straightened quickly, pulling herself together as if the world were watching. I had seen it. And that sight was enough. The masks were slipping. And she knew it. That night, sitting in my living room with only the lamp lit, I thought about the power of cracks. A mask doesn't fall all at once. It splits in places no one expects, then collapses under its own weight. And I didn't need to rip hers off. All I had to do was widen the cracks she'd made herself. I opened my notebook, flipping past pages of neat entries. Dates, behaviors, overheard conversations. Then I wrote one new line, underlined twice. Let her undo herself. I closed the book and smiled. The next morning I tested my theory. I walked to the fence with a plate of cookies, still warm from the oven, and called her name. She appeared on her porch, startled, robe clutched tight around her. "Oh, Mary," she said too brightly. "What a surprise." I held out the plate. "Baked too many. Thought you might like some." Her hand shook as she reached out. "You're too kind." I didn't mention the phone calls, the debt letter, the late-night pacing. I didn't need to. My kindness was sharper than any accusation. Her eyes darted to mine, searching for malice, but I gave her none. Only a soft smile that said, "I know more than you think." She thanked me, voice thin, and closed the door too quickly. I stood there a moment longer, breathing in the faint smell of lavender from her garden, then walked back inside. One more thread tightened. Over the next days I began leaving small reminders in plain sight. A newspaper folded open on her porch, the headline circling debt scams. A sermon bulletin tucked in her mailbox with a verse about dishonesty. An anonymous note slipped into her screen door. "Not everyone is fooled by masks." I never signed them. Never left fingerprints. But I made sure she knew they weren't random. And I watched the results. She grew restless. Her blinds closed earlier. She avoided long conversations at church. She rushed her errands, shoulders hunched as though the world had turned against her. Maybe it had. But it wasn't enough for me to watch her squirm. I wanted her to feel the silence pressing down, the kind of silence that turns every shadow into suspicion. One night I left a light on in my guest room, curtains slightly parted so she'd see me moving inside. Let her wonder what I was writing, who I was calling, whether I was gathering others to my side. Another night I walked past her house slower than usual, humming softly, eyes fixed on her window. She pulled the blinds shut with a snap. Every small act was a needle, pricking holes in her mask until it sagged under the weight. Of course, not everything went smoothly. My husband noticed I was restless, often sitting by the window with my notebook. "Mary," he said one evening, "you've been quiet lately. Something on your mind?" I forced a smile, setting the book aside. "Just tired, dear. Keeping track of bills, chores. You know how it is." He nodded, satisfied, but I felt a pang. I hated lying to him. But protecting him meant keeping him away from this storm. He didn't need to know I was weaving a web right under our neighbor's nose. Still, the weight pressed heavy some nights. I'd sit at the kitchen table, head in my hands, wondering if I was becoming as secretive as she was. But then I'd remember that phone call, that cruel lie, and the fear would burn away, replaced by resolve. The first real shift came on a Thursday. I saw her leaving the bank again, coat clutched around her, face pale. But this time she wasn't alone. Two men in suits stepped out behind her, their conversation hushed but tense. She glanced back at them, then at the street, eyes darting like a cornered rabbit. I stayed in my car, engine idling, heart steady. Whatever she was caught up in, it was bigger than petty theft. And it was closing in. When she spotted me parked down the block, her face drained of color. She turned quickly, disappearing into the crowd. I wrote another note in my book. Fear of exposure stronger than fear of them. That was the weakness I could use. Later that evening I acted. I typed a letter. Short, simple, deliberate. "Your secrets are catching up to you. The truth always finds its way out." I left it in her mailbox without a signature. The next day her car sat untouched in the driveway. Curtains drawn. No sound. By evening she finally emerged, hair disheveled, face lined with exhaustion. She crossed the yard slowly, stopping at my fence. "Mary," she said, voice low, "have you heard anything? People talking? Rumors?" I tilted my head. "About what?" She forced a laugh, brittle as glass. "Oh, nothing. Just silly paranoia, I suppose." Her eyes searched mine, desperate for reassurance. I gave her none. I only smiled politely, then turned back to my garden. She walked away with her shoulders slumped. Another crack. In the days that followed, her world grew smaller. Fewer visitors. No laughter from her porch. Her once pristine garden overgrown, weeds poking through where roses used to bloom. At church she avoided my gaze, sitting in the back pew silent during hymns. Whispers trailed behind her like shadows. And I did nothing but watch. Watch and wait. Because sometimes the sharpest revenge isn't a strike. It's the silence that lets someone unravel themselves, thread by thread. But the silence also weighed on me. There were nights I lay awake, wondering if I'd gone too far, if my small acts of pressure were breaking more than her mask. Yet every doubt was silenced by memory. Her voice on the phone. The panic she'd planted in me. The thought of losing my husband, if only for a moment. No, this wasn't cruelty. It was justice. One evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, I stepped outside to water my plants. She was on her porch again, staring into the distance, a glass of wine trembling in her hand. For the first time she didn't wave. She didn't even look at me. She just sat there, hollow-eyed, mask gone, fear painted clear across her face. I knew then I didn't need to lift a finger. She was already broken. But just as I turned to go inside, a sound stopped me. The faint hum of a car engine idling near her driveway. I looked closer. The same dark sedan I'd seen before. The suited man stepped out, knocking sharply on her door. She jumped, nearly spilling her glass, and hurried to let him in. The door closed, muffling their voices, but I caught a fragment through the still night air. "You're running out of time." I gripped the watering can tighter, heart pounding steady but strong. The cracks weren't just spreading. The whole mask was about to collapse. And I would be there to watch it shatter. The suited man's voice still echoed in the night air. "You're running out of time." I froze by the garden gate, my hand wrapped tight around the handle of the watering can. My neighbor's door closed behind him, the house swallowing their voices. The car engine idled a few moments longer before fading into the dark, leaving only the chirp of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. The mask she'd clung to was gone now. And I knew the storm was breaking. The next morning I found an envelope on my porch. No stamp, no name, just my address scribbled hastily across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper, half torn, the ink smudged from hurried writing. "Please. I need your help. Don't tell anyone. Come tonight." No signature, but I didn't need one. I recognized the handwriting. I sat at the kitchen table, letter trembling between my fingers. She was desperate enough to reach out to the one person who had stopped pretending. And that meant she was cornered. I folded the letter carefully, slipped it into my notebook, and whispered to myself, "It's almost over." That evening I walked across the yard, the sky bruised purple with dusk. Her porch light flickered on, weak and uneven. She opened the door before I knocked, eyes hollow, hair unkempt, shoulders slumped like she hadn't slept in days. "Mary," she whispered, pulling me inside. "I don't know who else to trust." The house smelled of stale wine and lavender, though the flowers on her table were wilted, petals scattered across the cloth. Bills and unopened letters lay in piles on the counter. The tidy woman everyone admired was gone. I stood still, letting her words spill. "They're after me," she said, pacing the room, hands wringing. "I thought I could fix it, but it's bigger than I realized. I didn't mean to. I just..." She stopped, meeting my eyes for the first time. "I needed money. Just for a while. But then it spiraled. And now..." Her voice broke. I didn't comfort her. I didn't move. I only asked quietly, "So you lied about my husband's stroke to get me out of the house?" She flinched. Silence filled the room. That was all the answer I needed. I walked past her toward the counter stacked with papers. Debt notices. Bank slips. Names I didn't recognize. A picture formed clearer than ever. She hadn't stolen out of need. She had stolen out of greed, arrogance, thinking no one would see through the mask. But I had. And she had invited me here tonight thinking I'd save her. "They'll destroy me," she whispered, voice small. "But if you help me, if you vouch for me, tell people it was a misunderstanding." I turned, cutting her off with a look. "You want me to cover for you?" Her lips trembled. "Please. I'm begging you." I took a step closer, lowering my voice so it cut sharper than a scream. "You made me believe my husband was dying. You made me drive through the night in tears. You made me think my life was breaking. And now you want me to save yours." Tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't know what else to do. You knew exactly what you were doing, I said, steady, calm. She collapsed into a chair, face in her hands, sobbing. And I stood there watching the woman who had tormented me unravel, her power drained away, her mask in pieces on the floor. The knock came just as the clock struck 9. Loud. Firm. Her head shot up, eyes wide. They're here, she whispered. I didn't move. The door burst open and 2 men in dark jackets stepped inside, badges flashing in the lamplight. The FBI. Ma'am, one said to her, voice clipped. You're under investigation for fraud and theft. You need to come with us. She turned to me, panic twisting her features. Mary. Tell them I'm innocent. I met her gaze, my face calm, my voice even. I'll tell them the truth. Her scream cut through the air as they pulled her up, wrists bound. She kicked, pleaded, eyes locked on me, but I didn't move. I simply stepped aside, letting the storm take her. The neighborhood gathered outside, whispers rippling through the crowd as the agents led her away. Porch lights flickered on, faces pressed to windows. Did you hear? Someone murmured. Fraud. All that time pretending to be so generous. I never trusted that smile. I stood on my porch, hands folded, saying nothing. My husband came out beside me, confused. What on earth is happening? I leaned into him, resting my head lightly on his shoulder. Justice, I whispered. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. The days that followed were quieter than I'd ever known. Her house stood empty, curtains drawn, garden untended. The car gone, the porch light dark. Neighbors talked, gossiped, speculated, but I didn't join in. I had no need. I'd already seen everything I needed to see. At night, I'd sit by the window, sipping tea, and feel the silence settle around me. Not the heavy silence of fear, but the light silence of freedom. The storm had passed. Sometimes doubt tried to creep back. Did I go too far? Could I have stopped her before it reached this point? But then I remembered her voice on the phone. The terror she had planted in me with one cruel lie. The way she had smiled afterward, believing she'd gotten away with it. And I knew. She had chosen her path. I had simply let her walk it to the end. One Sunday weeks later I returned to church. The pew where she once sat was empty. People still whispered about her, but now their words carried relief. A mask had been lifted from the community, not just from me. After service, a woman touched my arm gently. Mary, she said, you've been through so much. How are you holding up? I smiled softly. Better than ever. And I meant it. In the quiet of my home, I opened my notebook one last time. Pages filled with notes, evidence, observations. The web I had woven line by line. I tore each page out slowly, fed them into the fire, watched the flames curl the edges and turn them to ash. The smoke drifted upward, carrying the weight of months away. When the last page was gone, I closed the empty book and set it aside. No more webs. No more masks. Just silence. That evening I sat in my garden, the air warm, fireflies blinking in the dusk. My husband hummed softly on the porch. For the first time in months I felt peace seep back into my bones. Because revenge hadn't just broken her. It had rebuilt me. She stole money. She stole trust. But I stole back my life. And when the world fell quiet around me, I realized silence was the sweetest revenge of all. She thought she'd shattered my night, but in the end I was the storm, and she was the silence that followed. If this story struck a chord with you, imagine the ones still to come. Subscribe now for more dark, emotional revenge stories that will leave you breathless.